See Me, Handmade Tales by Karen O'Kane. At 11 years old, I started making textile art. I used embroidery during my art class at secondary school. Never really interested in drawing or painting, even though my grandmother was a professional artist who used watercolours and clay throughout her lifetime. Our Saturday mornings were filled with making things. Knitting, sewing, decoupaging and mosaic making, to name a few things that we got up to. She was incredibly creative, and I think our shared crafting times were an escape for her from her day-to-day life of painting and trying to make enough income to live. At 13 years of age, I dropped art at school to pursue the 3 sciences and didn't really come back to making until I was in my late teens. I was nearing the end of my time at university, where I studied psychology, and I had a voluntary job in a day centre for adults with learning difficulties. The centre was a bright, noisy, energetic place with a visiting artist. I helped in her sessions with the students. It was all about finding a medium to allow everyone to express their individual creativity. After graduation, I got a paid position facilitating art and crafts activities in the centre, making products which were to be sold to the public. We tried every craft that our resources allowed, including candle making. But after the 3rd call out from the fire brigade for setting off the fire alarm, my manager banned us from any more activities which entailed heating things up. This is when my love of silk painting began. I got a few paints together. Using an old crate, I stretched some silk type material over it, and while sitting in bed due to the cold, made my first ever silk painting in my Edinburgh flat. I was hooked, and then when I showed my students, they were also hooked. I worked in mental health, homeless and domestic violence services for 20 years, always on the front line, and the nature of the work meant there was very little time for art and crafts. But I always tried to squeeze it in when possible, knowing how important it is to allow people to be creative and make things. It's also a great way to form a connection with people who can sometimes be a little guarded. In 2010, I set up my studio in Donegal and started to facilitate workshops in the community. This has allowed me to share my textile skills, and in this piece I am using some of my favourite techniques. I love hand sewing, but I detest using a sewing machine, so my work is very time consuming. Texture and colour are my major inspiration in my work. Add to that the wonder and awe I get from the sea and what lies beneath, from my first visit to an aquarium as a child, diving and snorkeling around the world as a young adult, to a mindful stroll along one of our beautiful Donegal beaches, which I now use to keep me healthy and reduce the stress of day-to-day life. At the moment I am making a wall hanging using hand latch hooking, which I have just discovered my granddad did to transform old sacks into rugs as a hobby. My sea creatures have been painted on silk and sewn onto wool background. I love wet and needle felting, and it's something I do in schools a lot, so I made my coral from merino and silk tops. I usually needle felt in the evenings in front of the TV, mindful not to be watching anything with subtitles. Embroidery is a major love of mine, and punch embroidery is an easy and quick way to add texture to a project. I still have embroidery projects on the frame from 40 years ago yet to be finished. Hopefully I'll finish them someday.